I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. My life it lacked purpose. I was unhappy. My body was just breaking down, giving up. Fingers, toes, feet, hands, they all started to go black and change colour.
Alex becoming the first quadruple amputee to kayak around the southern tip of Greenland. The first quadruple amputee to kayak 300 kilometres down the Orange River of South Africa. The first quadruple amputee to cycle through Ethiopia and summit their highest mountain. Just being an all-round happy guy that is now grateful for everything that's ever happened to him. Welcome back, everybody, to the Turning Your Adversity into an Asset podcast with Raymond Taylor. You would have already heard the introduction that I've done today on today's interviewee for the podcast, and also YouTube. If you're watching this in person, you'll be able to see our faces. Hello, everybody. Alex is someone who I almost find intimidating because he has a real inspirational story. My inspirational story comes from things that I've done to myself. Admittedly, there were things along the way that weren't ideal, but I chose a path that I took. I managed to get myself back to normal. However, Alex's story is one that is truly inspirational in a couple of senses for me. One, this wasn't something that you chose, Alex. This happened, and something that's permanent, and it's not something that you can just use on your mindset to get over. This is a lifelong adjustment. But also what really inspires me is just how you are today. The things that you've achieved are genuinely things that I mean, limiting belief, alert here, but I don't think I could do now with poor limbs. That's the honest truth. I'm not trying to make you feel any way, special. I'm genuinely amazed at what you've been able to achieve. So there would have already been an introduction that sort of summarizes a few of the things that you've done up to this point. But welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem. Very grateful to have you here. So I'd like to start this one backwards, actually. Usually we sort of go chronological order through the story, and I'm sure you've done that many a times, and we'll get a chance to do that. But just to explain and re-explain for the audience and for yourself, and to bring some context to this sort of first question, the purpose of this podcast. So it's called Turning Your Adversity into an Asset, because I think most people think that if something bad happens to them, the best case scenario is the fact that they can adjust back to normal. But what few understand is that actually it can allow you to change your life and others' lives in ways that were better than what they were before. We're going to talk about all the charities and all the things that you've done. I want to start by asking you a question, and you may very well turn around and say, well, actually, no. But do you resonate with this turning adversity into an asset? And is that something you feel?
Yeah, I do feel it. I think I always refer to we, because it isn't just me. It's me and my family and people we work with and my friends, and just amazing support network. But yeah, that is something I feel. I feel that if I hadn't have faced adversity all those years ago, then I wouldn't have probably 95% of what I've got now. And it was just that fateful moment that has given me more than I could ever have imagined, and has given my family more than they could ever have imagined. And it's just put us in this incredible position where we can be adventurous and help others and just have a really, really great time. So yeah, I mean, adversity to me is probably my greatest asset, I think.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, because obviously I didn't know what you were going to say. You might have turned around and said, well, yeah, kind of, but I would prefer, but it's so true. You are, I would say, someone that's faced the most extreme adversity in some elements of their life with the people that I've interviewed. And from looking through your Instagram and watching your videos, you really do have a very, authentic zest for life still, And when you were saying 95% of what you have now, I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into that, because of course, monetarily, there's things there. but I should imagine there's also more there as well. You get to give, you get to, et cetera, et cetera. Can we talk a little bit more about what that 95% that you have now that you didn't have before is?
Well, I think most of it is probably a self-belief that I never knew I had prior to falling ill. And looking back on how I was between sort of 0 and 33, I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, I don't think. Wow. You know, I maintained a kind of easygoing image, I guess, which was great. You know, I still am easygoing, but I realize now that, you know, I have a level of effort that I need to put in to create my world. And that's the level of effort that I'd never even discovered before I fell ill. You know, I didn't know what I had within me. And I think my family and I were tested beyond belief when I did fall ill. And I guess the 5% would be my family. And what's followed on from that has been the other people that we've met, the life that we've had, the adventure, the travel, the work, the development, university research, all the stuff that we do, it adds on to that. But really, I think when it all came down to it, the 5% was my family and friends. And everything else went. And my old mindset went, my previous life went. The only thing that stayed was my family, Lucy, Sam. You know, without those guys, I wouldn't be chatting to you now, and I wouldn't have done anything like what I've done now without them. So they were the core, and the 95% is everything else that I've gone on to believe I could achieve with their support.
They're essentially your coaches, weren't they? I maintain that they're my fuel. They're the electricity to my my engine. I dread to think, I can't even imagine where I'd be if I hadn't had them in my corner when I fell ill. I can't imagine a life in this condition without their support. Absolutely. And we're going to dive deep into that. Before we do that, I gave a brief introduction for the podcast, but it was a bit of a summary. I would like to hear some of the story for anybody who hasn't seen Alex's story. Just before we get into that, just want to set the scenes back in 2010 when you was a construction worker and didn't feel that really struck me. And I got goosebumps when you said you didn't feel comfortable in your own skin. That's powerful. I don't know if you've used that line before and you've got a similar reaction.
But I don't think I have used it before, to be honest. But the more I think about it, in the last few months, I've had a lot to think about in terms of where I go next in this, my world. And there's been a lot of writing about where we were, when my son was born and how I was. And, in hindsight, alcohol was getting my mind away from feeling uncomfortable. Alcohol was my go-to answer, really, to try and make me feel comfortable and that I'd fit in, I'd be social, all those things.
I mean, again, I'm really looking forward to diving into your story, but I've got so many questions. Do you feel like there was, because we're really open on this podcast where we explore many different sort of ways of thinking. We've spoken to Dr. John D. Martini, who's very much about the brain. But also we can have conversations that go into the realm of spirituality and almost law of attraction and abundance and I guess a spiritual sense. Do you feel like there was any sort of divine intervention that came into your life at that moment in order to teach you lessons or to put you in your place of where you belonged on this planet to inspire other people?
I think I knew immediately that I was saved by science and two people really, Dr. Jeff Watson, who is now one of my great friends, and Alex Crick, my plastic surgeon, who is now one of my great friends. I think I met two people at the very top of their game in the National Health Service. And without that intervention, then I wouldn't be here now. But I remember when I was in Salisbury Hospital, the padre or the priest would come in and see me every week. And she was a very great sort of sounding board. And she knew that I wasn't a religious person. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought that maybe all the kind of good vibes and my friends and family and all the people that knew me were like, oh my God, positive vibes, it's going to be okay, he's going to get through it. Then, yeah, I think once I understood that level of support, then I think there probably was a more spiritual aspect to it than I ever had imagined. Mm-hmm. But then when you're heavily drugged, as I was, it's hard to know what was reality and what wasn't.
Can you look back on it now and go, I mean, because some people said, I even believe, and many others who inspire others believe, this had to happen to me in order for me to, learn these things, to be able to gift that back to others. And
yeah.
Do you believe in that?
Yeah, I do now. I didn't right at the beginning because we couldn't really see what it was one day at a time. You couldn't see beyond. And if you did start to think about the future, then it just put you into a massive kind of panic attack, really, because you were so worried about how you reconnect with your family. My little boy, probably, if it wasn't spiritual, then it would just be love. I loved my son and I loved Lucy, and I felt that I let them down in my previous life. And because I'd bucked, 1% chance of survival, I mean, what are the odds that, I survived? How many other people in my position didn't make it? I started to believe that actually, because of the people that I met and how it was going, that actually this was just incredible. Absolutely incredible. You could not make this stuff up. And the more people that would come into my room and they'd sit next to me and they'd just shake their head. They're like, how are you here? And I'd be like, I don't know. At that point, I didn't know, but now I understand that between that skill set of the people that we met in ICU and Salisbury ICU, and the surgeons and the nurses and the doctors and the healthcare assistants, those guys were just incredible. Absolutely incredible. They still inspire me every single day of my life to think of what they did.
People give the NHS a bad rap, don't they? But they're lifesavers, aren't they?
I don't get it. I know it's underfunded and I know the system is broken in part, but when you need it the most, the acute care is just on the money. And I think, for me, part of the public speaking that I do, and the reason why I do it for the NHS, is to shout from the top of the roofs that they're amazing. They need support. They need to know from people that survived that they did the right thing. A lot of people, when it happened, it kicked off with me, and it was amputation after surgical procedure. A lot of them couldn't see a life for me post injury, and they couldn't understand how on earth I was going to adapt and live with it. But it was the NHS that made that possible. Gave me understanding, gave me greater understanding of actually, you can deal with it. It's your mindset. It's how you cope with it mentally. I remember a guy told me he lost his legs below the knee and his hands and wrist, I think, through frostbite. He was mountain climbing. And he came to see me through a friend of ours, and he came down from Scotland, and he said, what you must always remember is with quadruple amputation, it's 95% mental, 5% physical. And I've never forgotten that.
Yeah.
And that has, that was a fantastic quote, probably 2.5 months into my new life as an amputee.
Wow. And I'm so glad you said that, because a big, thing, that we do, other than this podcast, is we have a coaching academy where we train people to become life coaches. And obviously the mindset is the biggest piece about that. And it's a shame that we don't really understand the mind and what it's, and the power that it has and what it can do.
And also that you can change it. I think people need to understand you can alter your mindset. And sometimes it can be really, really difficult. Other times it can be quite easy. But it's unlocking the mechanism, isn't it, to create a better mindset.
Yeah, and sometimes you need that rock bottom moment, as they call it, in order to be able to access that. You know, people that are living day-to-day life become complacent, and there's no real reason to have to dig deep into their mind to find that attitude and positivity. So it just becomes existing rather than living, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Imagine that's what it was like for you back in 2010 before things got started.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I was existing. My life it lacked purpose. I was unhappy. I loved my family. I felt I was letting them down, but I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't change my system in my head. And looking back on it, you know, I'm just filled with regret, really, of how I acted and how I was. You know, from the outside looking in, everything was sweet. You know, Alex had Lucy and Sam and the business and a new business, and you know, it was all great, but in reality it was anything but. And Strep A came along and did me a favor.
Wow. Okay, so that starts, just writing notes down here because there's things I need to ask you later on down the line. If you could share your story, I know it's one that's, I mean, some people ask me to share my story and in summary, and I'm like, how can I do that? so many twists and turns that I have to really explain for you to understand. But what I really want to do is have the opportunity to really speak about your mind and what you've been able to achieve and inspire other people, which is the whole point of this podcast. So could you give me maybe a 15-20 minute version, which I think should give you enough time to maybe share that story?
Yeah, squeeze that in.
Love it.
Yeah, so it's November 2013. Up to that point, I was a stay-at-home father with my young son, Sam. I had 2.5 amazing years with him while he was strapped to my chest. Lucy, my other half, we had 2 businesses, a countryside or a country inn in a village just outside of Romsey in Hampshire, and another restaurant in a town that I had lived in on and off over the years. We just set that up. And as I said, from the outside looking in, life was great. You know, it was all amazing. But in truth, I was a functioning alcoholic. My unit intake was astronomical. You know, I'd drink a barrel of Guinness a week, 2 to 3 bottles of wine every night. It was relentless. You know, and all that time I was, in charge of my little boy in the business. So obviously my side of the business was just tanking. And then in November 2013, I just caught a cold. It was, flu season, cold and flu season. Lots of people came in the pub with, coughs and colds. I didn't think anything of it, but over 2 weeks it got worse. And then mid-November, I remember waking in the night and I found blood in my urine. And then the following morning, I was rushed into ICU in Winchester. The paramedics gave me 20 minutes to live from when they picked me up to get me to Winchester. Winchester was about 18.5 minutes away from where we lived, so it was pretty touch and go. And luckily I got there.
What was it they had to administer to give you that, within those 2 minutes? Was it a certain...
They didn't know what I had. They had no idea what I was suffering with. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, my skin was turning purple and black. Blotches all over it. I was semi-conscious, almost unconscious. I couldn't physically move my legs and arms, nothing functioned. And at that point, in 2013, there wasn't as much about sepsis or strep as there is now in media and, and knowledge around it. They just knew that I had to be in ICU for drugs to be administered to try and keep me alive and figure out what it was. Yeah. So luckily we got there in time, luckily.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but I'll be honest, I'm a little bit naive when it comes down to those things as well. I'm not 100% sure. Do you mind sharing sepsis and those things, what they actually are and how they are?
The problem with sepsis and with strep, and we've seen it in the media in the last few weeks, a lot of children getting strep A because their immune systems are slightly weakened because of the pandemic. We all carry it in our throat, strep A. And my strep, I could not fight the cold. And then the cold led to strep A, septicemia, toxic shock syndrome, necrotizing fasciitis. Basically, my body was just breaking down, it's given up. So the strep was attacking me from my extremities. So my nose was purple, ears were purple, fingers, toes, feet, hands, they all started to go black and change colour in a matter of 48 hours post arriving in Winchester ICU. So it was incredibly quick.
Was that a result of, I mean, sorry to give quite a hard-hitting question here, but you can say all questions were on the table, and I'm happy for people to ask me similar ones. Was this a result of this sort of lack of immunity, I guess, that caused this escalation of problems? Was that directly correlated to your unhealthy lifestyle of the drinking and things like that, or was it just mere?
It's strange, that's what we all assumed at the start. So my family were like, well, what do you expect? He had a terrible lifestyle, he drank too much, ate badly, of course he's got no immune system. But then about 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, and no, less than that, sorry, it was about 2 weeks afterwards, I just got to Salisbury and I had a liver and kidney test. I was on dialysis, my kidneys had packed up, but it had nothing to do with alcohol. That was the septicemia and toxic shock syndrome. Kidneys are notoriously lazy and sort of kicking back into life. So the dialysis was necessary. But they carried out a liver test. And we assumed that my liver would be absolutely corroded by alcohol. But it came back as 100% functioning. So the alcohol had no detrimental effect on my vital organs.
Right.
And there's been we still don't know to this day why it happened to me, why it kicked off, why I didn't fight it, why my immune system didn't choose to fight it. And unfortunately, since then, I've caught strep A twice since. But if you catch it early enough, and obviously we know the warning signs now, that it just gets treated with antibiotics and it goes away. Speaking to my doctor months after I'd fallen ill and lost my legs and arms, he came to see me and he sat by my bed and he said, honestly, if you'd have come to my surgery and said, look, doc, I feel really rough, I've got cold flu symptoms, I feel achy, I feel very tired, hot and cold shivers. He would say, well, go home, take some cold and flu medicine. I'm not going to give you anything else because, you need to get some sleep, eat some better food and lay off the drink. He would never have diagnosed strep A, which in some respects I was glad about, because not going there, if he had diagnosed it, I would have felt awful that I'd missed that opportunity to go and see him. So him saying that was actually, thank goodness, because there was lots of question marks around, could we have done it any differently? Should we have seen the signs? But there was nothing we could have done. None of us knew anything about it. And there were doctors that used to come into the pub, and if they saw a landlord with, hot and cold sweats and feeling a bit rough, they're not going to look at me and think, strep A, get him into ICU.
Arsehole, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just one of those things. It was just fate. It happened to me, caught me. But then, fate allowed me to get to Winchester ICU within 18 minutes. Fate allowed me to meet the guy that ultimately saved my life. And when what he did to me, or gave the cocktail of drugs that he gave me, was frowned upon in the UK at the time. They trialled it in the US and they were seeing good results from it. He felt that if he doesn't try something or anything, then I was going to die. So he felt that it was what's the worst that can happen? So fortunately he did pump me full of drugs, and the following morning I did wake up. There's nothing we could have done any differently, which is quite a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, fair play to him. I mean, it's difficult to make those decisions in the spur of the moment, and it takes a certain character.
Absolutely.
With certain balls, I guess you could say, in the UK.
Yeah.
Or a more pragmatic, solution, strategic orientated mindset rather than an emotional. So that's a lot of doctors probably do display. I mean, we speak, but I speak quite a lot about sociopathy and things like that, because I'm very low on the emotional spectrum and I'm able to make those decisions, which is interesting. But fair play to that doctor. Well done for making that bold move. I mean, it could have gone the other way and he could have been, he could have lost his career over it, but you saved a life as a result.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this about me, but I just want to shout out the NHS as well. This is an international podcast. So for anybody listening who don't know what the NHS is, it's the National Health Service. And it's something that we get in the UK. Well, actually, I'm not in the UK and haven't been for some time because I've been traveling the world, but it's something that I grew up with, which is a free healthcare service, which I wouldn't say 90%, but a large majority of the population moan about because it's underfunded, and sometimes you're gonna have to wait a long time for an appointment, etc. And I think they're very complacent, probably isn't the word, but they just don't understand how much of a gift that is, because they don't know the costs of some of these things in other countries where people can't afford it and are left to die. For example, I was in Bali and I know a guy who had a bike accident and had a brain hemorrhage, and he had to have brain surgery, and they said, if you don't pay, then you leave.
Yeah,
it's as simple as that, and you die. And someone had to come up with the money for him because his parents didn't have the money. And myself, I was in the UK actually on a trip with my wife, fiance at the time, who was pregnant, and we found out during the pregnancy that there was a problem with the baby, and turns out that unfortunately Mia, my daughter, passed away. But my fiance, being American, they just took her in. They gave her the best service possible. They paid for everything. They even brought around charities to support her, and counseling, a funeral, all paid for. Nothing had to be thought about. Nothing had to be paid for. And she wasn't even from our country. She was visiting. It's incredible. So anyway, that's enough about me. To take me back to that moment where you took the drugs, it gave you the cocktail, and you opened your eyes. Where were you then?
So when I opened my eyes, I was obviously heavily drugged. I couldn't understand what happened. They were telling me all these terms like, toxic shock syndrome, septicemia. I had no idea what any of that meant. And I just saw not panic in my family, but more, oh, thank goodness you're alive. Thank goodness for that. And then I remember Lucy and my mum asking the doctors, what happens now? When is he going to be released? And they said, look, he's still really, really ill, but we can't continue his care. And they wouldn't say why. They wouldn't explain why. And my family were very upset, stressed, being told I was moving from Winchester to Salisbury. I mean, it was only sort of 40 minutes away, but it's like, why? Well, I don't understand why it's happening. And they wouldn't tell us. And when I arrived in Salisbury, I met my plastic surgeon, but she came in my room. Everyone had gone for coffee, I think, at that point. And I remember she sort of wafted in my room, and she's a beautiful, beautiful woman. And she just, came in very polite, asked, what's your name? Alex, nice to meet you. I'm Alex too, blah, blah, blah. And then kind of dropped this bombshell that, unfortunately the strap's so high up your arm, you're going to lose your left arm tomorrow. We'll amputate tomorrow, by the elbow. I think I can save your knee joints, but you'll definitely lose your feet and ankles. And I think I can rebuild your right arm with pioneering surgery by fusing an 18-inch flap from your left shoulder onto your right arm. And then I think I can save your face. But again, that's another pioneering surgical procedure where we're going to move a 12-inch piece of skin from your rib cage and your right shoulder. And then she walked out the door. And I remember lying there thinking, these drugs are brilliant. That's no way she actually said that. And then it just began to almost sink in and eat away a little bit. And I started to get agitated and panicked. And then my best mate, who'd flown in from Courchevel, he came to see me. He walked in the room and you could see I was upset. And I said to him, mate, we've got to escape. We need to hatch a plan to escape. And he's like, what do you mean escape? I said, well, they're going to amputate all my limbs. And he went, are you sure? I said, yeah, honestly, that's what she just told me. So then he got angry. He went outside. He got not aggressive, but he was just passionate and angry that that bombshell was delivered with no one in the room for support. Yeah. And then my mum heard about it. She got angry and upset. And then Lucy heard about it. She was angry and upset. And it was a really torrid time for all of us. I was freaking out and I was sedated that night. And in the morning when I woke, I was prepped for surgery, and that was the beginning of 7 weeks of in and out of theatre, almost every other day, really. It was brutal.
I shouldn't imagine. Well, I can't imagine, actually. And just run people through, I mean, I did give you an introduction, but run people through what actually took place after that point and in terms of surgeries. I mean, maybe not every one of them, because I should imagine it's been
a lot every day, something like that. Yeah, so I lost my left arm above the elbow. Unfortunately, they couldn't save my knee joint, so I have both legs amputated above the knee. They rebuilt my right arm, but unfortunately, I was to break that arm a few months later, and that resulted in amputation below the elbow.
How did you break that?
Well, this involves Holly Willoughby and an amazing day in London, actually. So when I came out of hospital, it was about mid-July, and the press had got hold of my story, and it was in the New York Times, and it was going around the world. And I had this amazing outpouring of love and support and messages. And it was this really weird wave that I was on. You know, I just got home. I was pleased to be home, pleased to be back with my son and Lucy. And you know, my best mate had moved in with me, and he was helping out. It was an amazing time. And we got an email from this morning saying, look, we've read about your story. We'd love you to come on the show. But I had a golden Labrador then, and she was named after Holly Willoughby. So on my dog's pet passport was Holly Willoughby Lewis. I always had a thing for her. And when this email came in, it was like, you know, Willy Wonka's golden ticket. I was going to meet Holly Willoughby and get a chat to her. It would be amazing. And then we emailed the show back. And I said, look, we'll come on the show, but I want it to be an opportunity to thank my best mate for what he did. You know, he gave up his job for 6 months to move in with my family and rebuild me and them, really. He was amazing. So we went on the show, met Holly Willoughby, met Foot Schofield. And then after the show, they said, look, we've booked you table and Nobu for dinner. So you go around London, do whatever you want, but make sure you're at Nobu at 7:30 in the evening. So me and my best mate, we used to live together in Winchester, and we had a great life together. And we were like two kids in a sweet shop. So we went straight into Soho. We started drinking early. We had a great day out, 2-star Michelin lunch, wonderful. Ended up at Nobu. We were so drunk, we don't really remember going there. And we realised that we hadn't let Lucy, my other half, know what we were doing. So my best mate had to call a taxi from Winchester with 2 drivers in it. One driver's drive his car home, and one driver's drive us home. So by the time we got home, it was 3 o'clock the following morning. And at that point, my arm was in a wrist support because the nerve growth was almost at my thumb. And this was incredible. This surgery was one of a kind, never been even trialed. You know, I was the child, the guinea pig. So I went to bed that night. And in the morning, I remember waking up. And at that point, I was using my right arm to push myself up out of bed. I would sit up. And I tried it and it didn't work. So I just thought, I've got a hangover. I had a great day yesterday. That's fine. So I rolled over on my left arm, pushed myself up, and I'd broken my right arm clean in half. So my hand was down by my elbow. Now, Lucy woke up. She saw that. She thought I did it in London. But I was adamant that it was absolutely fine when I went to bed the previous night. I was rushed back into A&E. I met my plastics team. They were livid because they thought I'd done it on a jaunt in London with my mate. And I said, that isn't, I didn't do it. And I was adamant I hadn't broken it the night before. And they took a load of tests and swabs and blood tests, and they put it in a cast. And at the end of that day, I remember my plastic surgeon coming to see me. Now, this is the woman that was so cold and almost abrasive at the beginning of my tenure in Salisbury. She knelt in front of me and she was crying. And I sort of shook my head and I was like, oh my God, you know, what can we do? And she said, well, we can try and pin it and we'll put rods in it. But that's probably 2.5 years of your life where you will not be able to learn to use a wheelchair, learn to walk, do anything really. You're going to be looking at that arm, praying that it's going to work. And we can't guarantee that that's going to be the case. Or you can amputate. So I immediately said amputate because I wasn't willing to not roll around on the floor with my son, learn to be independent, learn to live with my condition. So I said amputate immediately. And she said, look, you can't make that call. So I went home to my family and I asked Lucy and my son and my best mate, and they were like, that's what you want to do, mate, then do it. You know, it's up to you. So the following day I was in for surgery in Salisbury, and they amputated my arm below the elbow. And after the surgery, my surgeon comes back in the room and she's almost grinning like a Cheshire cat. And I'm looking at her thinking, I said, why are you so happy? You just amputated my one remaining arm. And she said, no, you don't understand. The swabs have come back and it shows, and we couldn't see it, but you had strep A in the bone of your right arm, which must have got in there while we were operating all those months ago. She said, if you hadn't have broken that arm the night before last, the chances are we would not have discovered it. And at best, you would have lost your arm at your shoulder. If we left it for another week to 10 days and you hadn't discovered it at that point, then it would have killed you.
God.
So breaking that arm, going out on that night out in London, rolling over in the night, literally all I did was roll over on it. It was so weakened, and it broke clean in half.
I love that as well, because it's just another example of how bravery and that just amputate it, I want to move forward. It pays dividends, doesn't it? You know, it's
Absolutely.
not, it saved your life. And there's people that are unable to make those decisions for themselves, and it can, obviously send them in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Incredible story. So let's talk about the face as well, because I'm amazed by the face. I mean, I've seen the journey of
the
face, and you know what? You must be elated by that, because I should imagine the face is a very important part of the body. Of course, all of it is, but you're able to speak articulately, which is obviously a blessing. But you can now no longer tell that you have any, which is amazing. So tell me about that journey, because that must have been, I've seen the pictures prior to the surgery in the face. Maybe we'll start there. That must have been a bit of a shock to see yourself looking like that. I put words in your mouth, but.
Yeah, no, it was. I mean, I didn't look in the mirror until probably 5 months after amputations and being in Salisbury. At no point did I think I want to almost see myself. It was hard to understand. I could see that I didn't have any legs. I could see I didn't have a left arm. And I could see my right arm. But my hand was at a weird angle. My hand looked dead. It was really a weird thing to be looking at. But I understood the gravity of the situation at that point. And I understood the gravity of the surgeries that were being carried out. And I remember my surgeon saying, look, we can rebuild your face and we'll move that skin around. It's a long process. I think the op was 21 hours, under the knife, straight through. And it was a 3-part process. So I had one surgery, then another, then that long 21 hour. And I remember waking up in ICU and thinking, oh my God, something's gone wrong. Because usually I'd go in for surgery, I'd wake up in recovery, and then I'd be back on the ward with the nurses and the doctors. And I woke up in ICU and I felt I was scared. I had a massive reaction to the anaesthetic. And I felt I was in a war zone. I couldn't escape. Every time I drifted off to sleep, I'd be in this awful nightmare. And I'd be hiding behind walls. People were after me, shouting for me, trying to gun me down. And I kept waking up in this kind of awful state. And I remember my surgeon coming to see me once I'd woken up properly. And I could see this enormous bit of skin hanging off my chin. And I was like, it's gone wrong. Oh my God, it's gone wrong. And she said, look, we couldn't tell you the gravity of the surgery because you're going to have another 9 or 10 operations on this face. And to tell you that before the surgery, it would have given you enough time to say no. And we were too far gone at that. The skin was dying. And she said, we can't prepare you for the psychological effect it has on you. And with the face, she was saying to me that a lot of the injured lads from Iraq and Afghanistan, if they have facial disfigurement, it's the hardest thing to cope with. It's the hardest thing psychologically to get your head around. Limb loss, we can all cope with that. It sounds weird, but we can live with it. But facial disfigurement was a very, very different kettle of fish. And I said, what's going to happen now? And she said, well, it's going to be more surgeries. And what it was, the conical piece of skin sticking out of my chin was a spare bit of skin because I had one shot at getting the surgery right with my surgeon. And so she took a huge bit of skin, left a bit hanging out because that was the last bit. If one didn't take, we had one more chance, and that was the cone sticking out of my chin. And once it started to be explained, and I got my head around it, and
I guess you can't put more back on, but you can take some away. Is that the kind of?
It was that. Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
I think I had 32 donor sites of skin available to me when I had my legs amputated. So my surgeon knew what bit of skin she was going to use for my face, and she knew that the other bits of skin would go on my legs. So this was an amazing kind of amount of thought that went into my surgical life, really. I was amazed about the amount of homework she did on it. But she said, we can't harvest skin for the face, so we need that one bit on your rib cage. And over the course of time, the cone went, but what they would do is they would open it all up, they would remove the stitches, and they would shave bits of flesh away, because the skin on my rib cage and shoulder it's a fatty skin. So when you put it on a face where the facial skin is very thin, it's immediately bulbous. And I look, at that point, I looked like Homer Simpson, and I remember trying to explain to my son who Homer Simpson was. He was too young to really know who he was. But over time, the surgeries continued. And then I met Karen Betts, who is a world-leading facial tattoo artist in London, because she was the only one who my surgeon felt was qualified to carry out the work, to give me lips, to give me freckles, to give me stubble. So, I think it took 2 years for me to get to the point where I could wheel past the mirror in my hallway and not look at my face. And after a couple of years, I remember I wheeled past and I just glanced, and then I kept going, and then I stopped and I thought, oh my God, I've got my face back. That one moment was like, it's there, it's returned.
Well, right now, looking at you, you wouldn't actually know anything was wrong.
It is amazing.
Because even your limbs, obviously they're below camera, and I can see the top of your arms. So, and you can speak normally. So it's incredible. And I mean, of course, if anybody hasn't seen Alex's story in all its detail, you did a documentary about it as well, right? So this is all documented, where they can see. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that, and so people can actually see some of these historic images and graphics along your journey.
I mean, the documentary was just heaven sent, really. It was a very, very handsome Italian Brazilian guy that sent an email just as I was about to leave hospital the first time around, and he said, I've read about your story. I'd like to film a documentary. I've never done it before. I've done adverts and I've worked in media. I've never done a documentary. I remember reading it and Lucy reading it, and we had a chat about it, and we agreed that the only reason we did it was so that we could chronicle how important our son was to us both at that time, to give me the strength to want to come out of hospital, to return to my family. He was instrumental, that little lad, but he was only 3.5 at that time. So we agreed with Leo that we would do the documentary, and Leo, bless him, he filmed every day for 2 years solidly. He funded it himself. He paid for all his travel. You'd have to force him to have a cup of tea. He was just amazing.
Wow. But I know that costs a lot of money to do that kind of production as well. So
yeah, but he was more than just a director of a documentary. He was my psychologist. I saw him every day. I would relive my story every day. And the more that we talked about it, the more I understood it. And actually that 2 years with Leo had a massive, massive positive effect on my mindset and my head. And it did instill in me the importance of speaking about what happened and why I need to keep speaking about it, because there's facets of the story that you forget. But also, I just find now that is my therapy, to be able to talk about it a lot. And, most people around locally are sick to death of it, hearing about it. But for me, it's really important that I talk about it openly and honestly, because that's how I understand it and that's how I get through it.
Absolutely. I mean, I always talk about this. I say, what's consistent with coaching, mentoring, consultancy, therapy, psychotherapy, psychiatry? What's consistent with them all? It's just talking.
Yeah.
That's all it really is.
Yeah. It's the most powerful tool, isn't it? That's all, to communicate and ask questions and understand and be open. You know, for me, we can delve into, there's no stone left unturned in the last 10 years of my life. And because of that, I feel incredibly free and open and able to take anything on. There's nothing harboring away. There's nothing slightly eating in there somewhere that might cause issues.
Well, we've spoken about the psychological feat that you've been able to achieve, which undoubtedly was the cause that led that 1% survival rate to be increased to 100% now as we stand here today. Now let's talk about the things that you've done after, because of course this must have given you some charge, some surge for life, some purpose, because some of the physical things that I can see you've achieved from the notes that I've gathered, they're not just you walk in the park, your London Marathon. They're absolutely insane things that I would look at and go, personally, being a coaching master and a trainer of 6,000 coaches across the world, I would look at it and think, I can't do that. Right? So tell us a little bit about the journey of the charitable things and the I guess, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I guess it was like, I'm going to show the world, I'm going to show myself that I can do these things no matter what. Was that part of that as well as a charity? Or?
No, it wasn't that. I think it was serendipity, really. I met a guy who, again, had seen an interview on the local news, and he got in contact and he said, look, I've seen what you're going through. I have a charity in the South Coast called the Pilgrim Bandits, and we help injured servicemen from Afghanistan and Iraq. You seem like you're willing to give anything a go. Do you want to come skydiving with us? And it was that kind of cliche that was like, yeah, absolutely, I've never done it before. Let's go skydiving. Fantastic. And I remember getting to the skydiving school just down the road from where I live. I drove up there with my dad at the time, and we got out and we were met by this enormous bloke called Mike. And Mike came sort of wafted over to me, and he peered down at me and he said, oh, you must be Alex. I said, yeah, nice to meet you. Are you Mike? He went, yeah, nice to meet you. And he said, have you ever done skydiving before? And I said, no, I've never even dreamed of doing it when I had legs and arms. But now I feel it's a different me now. And I said, I don't mean to sound ridiculous, but I just want to give it a go, see if I like it. And he was like, oh, good for you. You know, it's a great attitude. And I said, have you ever done a skydive or tandem dive with a quadruple amputee? And he said, no, never. No, this is all new for us. And I think in my mind, I just assumed that quadruple amputees were doing it because it was there to be done. And Mike said, well, we've never done it before. And I said, well, hold on a minute, how's that going to work then? And
I don't want to be a guinea pig for this.
Exactly, yeah, I don't mind being a guinea pig on some things, but if they're on the ground, that's fine, but not in the air. And he said, all we can do is put you in a suit and wrap you with duct tape, you know, and you'll be strapped to my chest. I was like, oh, okay. I said, I've got to be honest, Mike, that doesn't fill me with confidence. And he was like, oh no, trust me, you'll love it. And when I got up in the plane and we got to 15,000 feet, and I just had this incredible sense of calm. I felt so at peace with everything. You know, you have that time, that quiet time as you go up in the air, and, you know, most people are sort of panicky or excited or whatever it may be. I just didn't say a word. I was just so happy. He sort of shuffled me to the door and he said, are you ready? And I was like, so I've never felt better. And over we went, and we had a minute of free fall, which was it was the first time in probably 2 years that I hadn't felt like I was a quadruple amputee, hadn't felt disabled, you know, that I was just being. And I felt so serene with it. And as we got to the ground, Leo, the director guy, was still filming, and he came rushing over and he said, how was that? How was that? And I said, honestly, that's the best thing I've ever done. And from then on, everything was on the table. You know, the kayaking around Greenland, the kayaking in South Africa.
Well, slow down a little bit though, because this was kayaking to, I believe, 300 kilometres.
Yeah. So we did 300k on the Orange River in South Africa, which was.
I mean, let's just put that in perspective. The London Marathon, what was that? 23 kilometres or something? Isn't it?
26 miles, I think.
26 miles, right? Okay, so So this is what, 15 times the length of the marathon.
Yeah. I mean, it was an amazing 10 days of wild camping in the bush, by the side of the river, with the baboons, and it was just brilliant. Scorpions, you name it, it was all going on, and it was just amazing. But Greenland, that came before that was probably a better trip, because I've never kayaked at all before I fell ill, and I arrived in Greenland with about 4 hours of kayaking under my belt. So I couldn't have been any greener if I tried. But it was the first time that me and my best mate had gone away together on an adventure. And we were more pumped about that he and I were together and were doing something that we never would have done prior to falling ill. Mm. We had an amazing 10 days, and the icebergs and the ice caps, it was just beautiful, and the wildlife. And on the final day, we were tracked by a whale. And this fjord was monstrous. It was probably 35k. And obviously, with a whale frolicking around you in a little kayak, people do tend to panic. And we all got a bit of a shift on. But when we got to the island we were sleeping on that night, the whale kind of sort of danced around in front of us and flipped his dorsal fin, and off he went. And it was just the most incredible connection with nature, something that I'd never, ever had or never felt. And that night, my best mate and I, we shuffled up onto a rock, and we could see all down the fjord, and the whales were in the distance mucking about. It was just amazing. Mm. And I remember putting my arm around him, and I said, could you ever imagine in a million years that you and I would be sat on this rock watching the sunset with whales frolicking in a fjord? Mm. And he giggled. He's like, thank goodness for Strep A. I said, exactly.
Wow.
What it gave us in that 10 days. And we've gone on to see much more since then, but for he and I, that Greenland trip was just probably the most life-affirming thing we'd ever done together.
Well, I've got a list here, and I don't mind reading them out for you. Obviously, you beat the survival odds of the 1% initially. You was the first quad amputee to kayak around the southern tip of Greenland, the first quad amputee to kayak 300 kilometres down Orange River in South Africa, the first quad amputee to cycle in Utopia. Oh no, how'd you say that? Ethiopia.
Ethiopia,
yeah. Sorry, I'm a little bit illiterate because I got expelled from school at 15. And summited the highest mountain in Ras Station, as well as co-founding 3 companies and doing these documentaries and doing these podcasts. So tell me a little bit about some of the endurance that you had to face in order to be able to make these things possible. Because we would all look at those things and be like, God, that seems like an incredible feat, regardless of the obstacles that you would have in your way. Were there times that you wanted to give up? Were there times that you wanted to,
Never. No, never. Even now, the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end just thinking about it. But these trips and the endeavours that we do can only be made possible by understanding how we redesign equipment. There is no book when it comes to being a quad amputee about what you can use to hand cycle. And I think that's the first, the bike, I have a 3-wheeled hand cycle that I've used for years now. And I remember going to the company that sold it to me, and I said, I want to buy a hand cycle. And they were like, yeah, great, fantastic. And they imported it from America, and, we had all this amazing kit put on it. And even now they use the tagline that they sold a hand cycle to a man with no hands. And they'd never done it before. They were like, nobody ever comes to us like you with these ideas. And they're like, how are you going to ride it? And I said, well, don't worry about that. I'm going to go to a prosthetic clinic, and we're going to buy some arms that will fit onto me, and away we go. And I remember going to the clinic up in Amersham, and I was sat there in front of about 6 people. And they said, so what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want a hand cycle. And obviously I want to learn to walk, and I want to use prosthetic arms, bits and pieces. Oh, okay, yeah, no problem. So you want a hand cycle? I said, yeah. I said, well, surely there must be something on the market that we can purchase for that. And they were like, no, there isn't a double arm amputee hand cyclist anywhere. And I was like, that can't be right. Surely there must be other people like me wanting to do this sort of thing. So we worked with them, and we had to co-design the arms and the prosthetics and how they would work on the bike. It's amazing collaboration of engineers, prosthetists, and me, the end user. And it kind of instilled in me that actually the path that we were on just hadn't been trodden at any point. So, off we went, and we had to forge new ideas, create equipment. The bike that took me across the Simien mountain range was a 2-year university project down in Southampton. And it was the first solar-powered, battery-assisted, 4-wheeled, custom-made hand cycle, which sounds a bit of a mouthful. It's an amazingly cool bit of kit. I remember when we got it out there, we'd only tested it for maybe 6 hours, if that, and we were going to thrash it through a mountain range. And we did. Over 12 days, we crossed hundreds of kilometres of the mountain range, which was just beautiful. And on the day we summited Ras Tashen, there was me, the guy that pulled me to the top of the mountain, because I had to be belayed up at parts and I was shuffling up the rock on other bits. But the guy that got me to the top and pulled me over to the top was Jeff Watson, the man that saved my life at that point, 7 years previous. And that was an amazing thing for he and I. And it, again, life affirming for the both of us. And it was an amazing feeling because neither of us would be on that mountain had we not met each other. It would never have happened for us. And I remember coming back down the mountain and we were being filmed for a documentary, and the directors are like, "Can you get back on the bike?" Now, at this point, the bike was absolutely wrecked. It was in bits. The brakes weren't working, the steering had gone. And they said, "We want you to go round this long corner, and there's this huge puddle. We want you to tear through that and then stop a little bit up the hill." Now, bearing in mind that on the right-hand side of this track was probably 15,000 feet drop. And we couldn't really see it, luckily, because it was quite misty that day. And I got on the bike and I started cycling, and one of the bearings went on the steering. And luckily, the bike was dragged into the cliff face on the left. And I managed to keep going and go around the corner. But if the other bearing had gone on the right, I would have been over on that 50,000 foot drop, and there'd be no more me.
I was saying that, but there probably would have been a branch that would have caught you or something and sprung you back up.
In hindsight, what we were doing was absolutely mental.
Did you capture all that on film as well?
Yeah, it's all documented. So we have
they was like, "Thank God you're alive," but thank God for that footage. Yeah, that was amazing. Brilliant.
But it's an amazing trip. But I think for me, the Ethiopian trip, the adventure, great. But I realised that after a couple of years of going to places like Greenland and Africa, I wasn't doing anything for my community. I was just having a great time, and personal development is fantastic, but I felt I had more to offer. So we set up an affordable wheelchair manufacturing site in a city over there, because wheelchairs, the one I use is about $4,500, $5 grand, whereas over there it's $1,000 a year as an annual income. So wheelchairs are unattainable. So we worked with universities over there and here in the UK, and then we now make a wheelchair for $200, which NGOs can afford. So we support people like me, and I know Ethiopia's been ravaged by war in the north, so there's lots of amputees now coming down, and we now have solutions for them. So it was more about a legacy that would aid people like me, and hopefully in time give them the opportunity to go up their highest mountain. To not have had that, Emma Beck that was with us, who was a double leg amputee, she was a wheelchair basketball phenomenon, really. She was incredible. But again, she'd never climbed the highest mountain, and we got her up there. So for a black woman and a white man with 2 arms between them to be sat on top of the highest mountain in Ethiopia, it was an incredible moment. Great trip.
More than great. Yeah. You mentioned there that hopefully you'll be able to get people up their highest mountain. As an analogy, I would imagine you through those wheelchairs have already helped people achieve their highest mountain. I mean, I guess not everybody wants to, go to the top of a physical mountain.
No.
But they want to get down to their local shop or get water or, connect with their family. And that's something you have already been able to do. It's incredible. I talk about the ripple effect. I don't know if you've heard of the ripple effect. It's pretty simple. The fact that you help this amount of people, but then they're inspired to then go off and help this amount of people. And the fact that your documentary alone has had 100 million views, and also all these other charitable events that you've done, and the engineering that you've then created and businesses, it's hard to fathom really the effect that you've had on the world. It's probably far across the majority of it. I mean, there's probably few people that have heard your story at this point and have not felt something from that. And this is exactly why I created this podcast, because I want people to look at the nuances of life that they moan and complain about and think, now, what the hell am I talking about? These aren't problems.
No.
If this guy can turn around and say, thank God for septicemia or strepsis or strep, or sorry if I said the wrong name there. It's a lot of new words for me. Thank God for those times. It's incredible, because it really does show that you can turn adversity into an asset, and not in a selfish way. Not in a, oh yes, now I've, can travel and now I've got some extra money, but in a way of, I've been able to use this as an asset for others, in not just helping a few people down the local church or whatever, but changing the world in your own way. And if we're all able to do this, the world becomes a much better place very quickly.
Absolutely. I'm putting together a group of people at the moment, and we're heading out to Ukraine in 2 weeks' time, to Kyiv, and we're going to do some work over there to try and aid the victims of the war with limb loss and, crushed limb. There's lots of problems over there. And if you'd have said to me a year ago, you'll be going to a war zone next year, I wouldn't have believed you. And the fact that somebody got in contact with me and said, look, we think you can help. Do you want to get involved? I didn't even have to think of the answer. It was an immediate yes, because I just feel that I've been so fortunate with who I've met and what I've done, who I've done it with. It's all people, it's all a network of amazing people that build me up, prop me up, keep me sane, and give me the strength really to do this sort of thing. Next year in June, I think we're rowing across the south of England in an adapted rowing boat for 400 miles. Again, it's never been done. And for me, I realise now I'm not the guy that wants to win a race. I'm not the guy that wants to do something that others have done. That isn't where I sit. I want to be the guy that takes on something that people would never have dreamt of doing, the endeavour. If it fails, it fails. I'm not worried about that. Yeah. But it's the fact that you give it a shot and you try and make it work with the right group of people. And then who you meet along the way just enhances your life tenfold, thousandfold.
And just talking to those people, I want to, talk about your family, of course, become your biggest coaches and your biggest support network. And of course, your family dynamic must have had to change and adapt and evolve throughout the years in order for this to be, to you to adjust to life, not just for you, but for them as well. I'd love to talk a little bit more about how that process went.
Well, it started really when I just got to Salisbury, and I just lost my arm, I think. And a good mate of mine and Lucy's came to see me. And he said, look, I'm going to ask Lucy the question that you don't want to ask her. And I knew exactly what he meant. And that was, look, Lucy, you didn't sign up for this. You were having a tough time as a couple before you fell ill. You shouldn't feel that you have to be by his side. But if you're not going to be by his side, you need to tell him now. He needs to understand immediately. And he went to see her and he asked her the question. And her comment was, I love him. I'm not going to leave him. And then her comment was, I didn't fall in love with his fucking legs.
What a woman.
And I remember he came back and he told me, and that was before the amputation. And I was like, oh my God, it made me cry. I was so relieved that she still wanted to be part of this. And, when my little boy saw me in Christmas of 2013, he didn't recognise me. He hid behind Lucy's legs. It was heartbreaking. But the only way I got through that was with Luce. She was is such a formidable presence in my life. You know, I would not be the man without it.
I don't know what she does for a living now. Maybe she just supports you.
If you want to, I mean, turning adversity into an asset. So we now have, we still have the restaurant that we were just setting up when I fell ill. She has a wine import business. She has a catering company. She has a bakery business, and she has something else, another company. She sets up hotels. Honestly, she's on the hard.
Can't even count them anymore.
Honestly, it's ridiculous. So between us, it's given us exponential growth since falling ill.
Yeah. Wow. And that's exactly what I knew I would hear and wanted to hear for this podcast to be so impactful. And it's true. It's believable. And if you go to Alex's Instagram, which I believe is, it's Alex Lewis Trust. You just watch some of the videos, and I like the more candid ones where you're talking down the pub, and you're just a normal guy now, and there's no self-doubt, there's no lack of confidence. There's just, I should imagine, probably more confidence now than you've ever had before. Is that, again, sorry, I'm putting your words in your mouth left, right, and center. That's the worst thing for a coach to do. But
it is that. It's having that confidence, but that confidence comes with an incredible, again, it's that sense of peace. I'm at peace with who I am and what I do and what I am. I've never felt more content ever. Wow. Year on year, it gets bigger and stronger and better and more exciting and more adventurous and weirder with some of the things we dream up. But now we're in a position where, if I want to row in a rowing boat with an e-bike system in it behind my seat or whatever, we can do it. We'll go to university and we'll go to people and they say, well, do you want to get involved? They're like, hell yeah, why not? Yeah. We have this amazing support, and it just makes for an incredible life. I didn't know I had it. If I had opened my eyes more prior to falling ill, I would have seen that I had such incredible support around me. Who knows what could have happened, but I don't regret a minute of the last 9 and a bit years. None of it. And
that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you. So you've gone from a alcoholic pub landlord sweating behind the bar with a low immune system to a inspirational figure that changes the world and has done things he never thought possible with the best self-confidence that he's ever had. And it took probably the worst physical debility that someone could ever face. So anybody listening, what you got to say about that? So my final question for you, and then I want to leave it on one thing as well. Final question I have for you today, and thank you so much for your time today, is for anybody who doesn't quite understand the concept of turning an adversity into an asset and is thinking, I'm going through this right now, and although it's not quite as big as Alex's, to me it feels big enough. And I just don't see how I can get out of this and how on earth I could ever turn it into an asset. It just doesn't, at the time, obviously you can't see it because you're in this black tunnel.
No, exactly.
It's hard to give this advice on the spur of the moment, but, intuitively, what comes up for you if someone was to be in that space, what would you say to them?
Look to those around you. We all have a why. I remember reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl when I was having my facial surgery. And I was reading it through, and there was this amazing quote, and it's, once you work out the why, you'll endure anyhow. And it wasn't a Frankl quote, but it was Nietzsche, I think.
Oh, right, okay. Simon Sinek does the why, doesn't he? But anyway.
But it was like a lightning bolt. That the why were Lucy and Sam, and the how was the quadruple amputation. Now, I think we all have a why. It could be a parrot, it could be a dog, it could be a stray cat, it could be anything. You need to seek out the why, and then your endurance will build from that. And I think sometimes people forget that their why is probably staring them in the face. Yeah. They've just forgotten about it, or it's been overlooked, or life takes over and you kind of drifted apart, whatever it may be. But they're there. I think whatever you do, don't do what I did and get to that point where you nearly have to die to trigger it. to see it. I think we need to be a bit more aware of who's in our corner, and then you feed off them.
What was that quote? It's something like a smart man learns from his own mistakes, but an even smarter man learns from other people's mistakes, or something like that. But
I'm terrible with quotes.
I'm terrible with grammar, so I don't even know if smart is a word. But exactly. So for anybody listening now, you don't need to hit your rock bottom. You don't need to wait for that amputee. You don't need to wait for that addiction or that loss. You know, you can start to look for ways to empower yourself and move your life forward now. Yeah, just the last thing I want to end this on is, well, we at the Coaching Masters, the company that I founded, we give back to charities in certain ways. Sometimes it can be more difficult to give to charities than you think, because it's actually, you know, there's loads of people that want to give to charities. It's like, come on, I want to help, but you know, you're giving me an application process that's going to be, you know, reviewed next year. So I just want to put forward, if there's any way that the Coaching Masters, in terms of coaching qualifications, can help either you or your family or the people around you or the charities you support, and that's always available to you. I'm also looking for, no problem whatsoever. I feel like a company of our size should do those things. So, you know, I actually make it mandatory for all of our staff to find a charity to give something from the company to.
Amazing.
But I'm looking for something personally, because I feel like I've massively developed my life, but almost become complacent with that one now. And I'm looking to stretch that. So I'm looking for something to be proud of and some sort of inspirational, meaningful quest that I could be a part of. So I'd like to just plant that in your mind. It's just, if anything comes up, because you're the first person to be called for these things, I should imagine now. If anything comes up and you need an extra man, give me a shout. I'd be up for coming with.
If you're in the UK around June, then jump on the boat for a bit. It's a 2-man rowing boat. So we'll be out in the Channel and around the coast of Britain. But yeah, if you want to jump on that for a couple of hours, great.
All right, I'm writing that down. June, UK. What we're doing? We're rowing around the Channel.
Well, we're rowing from Falmouth to Dover. It's about 400 miles.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but what I'm doing, it's for 2 charities, and I'm setting up a new foundation in and around assistive technology, because my life is well and truly planted in that space. This is more about, again, it's a weird endeavor, but because it's a 2-man rowing boat, I'll be rowing the whole 400 miles, and we're going to have different people jumping in and out of the boat. So we might have I'm supporting Hospitality Action because that's our field, Lucy's field. You know, we'll have some chefs in there, we'll have some rock stars in there, some famous faces, but we'll have stories that have been supported by the charities, stories that have helped me. It's like a month of touring the south of England, really, discovering new people, different stories.
I'm up for it, Alex. If that's something you're up for, we already share a common mutual name with the Lewis.
Exactly.
I'm connecting on a more deep basis. So that's something I can give to you. Any coach training, I really mean that. You know,
yeah, that's great. That's
great. That could benefit from. Because we help people become life coaches. You already are one by nature, by what you've been through, and you know you're a public speaker and such like. But some people need to sort of learn those tools, techniques, and models and frameworks. But some people can use it for their own mind, and some people can use it to help other people, or to build a business, or to create, you know, some sort of financial stability, no matter where they are in the world, no matter, you know, if there's a
lot of our university research work, certainly up at Imperial, we tend to encourage more students to spin out on their own, to set up their own companies, rather than going to work for big engineering firms. You know, we want them to develop the ideas that we work with them on further. So that sits really, really well in our space. And that's something that our foundation would love to send your way, really. I mean, we've got loads of students on the books at the moment.
Amazing.
With assistive technology, we all use it: glasses, hearing aids, wheelchairs, walker sticks, you know. At some point, it's going to be in our lives. And my biggest quest really is to make sure that we develop more affordable solutions. So it's a global marketplace, not just for the West.
This podcast has gone slightly over what I promised you it would, so I'm sorry.
And also, I can wrap it on for days.
No, it's my fault actually, but it's no one's fault. It's brilliant. I mean, I think everybody would sit here for hours listening. I got one last final question, which I've told you 3 or 4 times already, but this one's quite a big one. But something we're developing out in our coaching galaxy, we call it, because we're multifaceted. We have apps, we have education, we have co-working spaces, we have all sorts of things. But one of the things we're building out is virtual reality. And we have an app on the Oculus. Have you ever had any experience with virtual reality before?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I worked on a project with a group of students in Imperial about 3 years ago when the Oculus lens was about $7,000.
Right. Okay. Now it's $300.
Yeah, exactly. And we were developing a system where they would put 2 very small dots on the ends of my arms without prosthetics on. Mm. And I would be able to design interior spaces, restaurant spaces, all the interior design work that I used to do. It would just all be gesture control. So I would be operating in midair, designing the space. That was fascinating for me. And that was more about the user interface being more accessible for people with disabilities.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, there's a lot of stigma around virtual reality becoming a replacement of society, but I've always seen it as something that complements society. We're always going to be consuming either the newspaper or our iPhones or our VR headsets or our whatever we have in the future. I think for people with disabilities, there are some like you who just go, it doesn't matter, I'm going to go out and do these things anyway. But there are other people that maybe don't quite have the strength at that time to be able to go ahead and do those things. But by putting on the Oculus headset, they can virtually get there. And actually, after a while, your mind adjusts and it kind of feels relatively normal. So anyway, that's a conversation for another day. I could talk about that for hours as well. But I think that's a big space within disability, because not with disability, people that don't have access to mainstream education. They put on a headset, as long as they've got internet connection, which obviously is a barrier for a lot of people, but as long as they've got an internet connection and one of these pieces of hardware, which will come down in cost over the years, and
of course,
Mark Zuckerberg is trying to make them as affordable as possible to try and get it adopted across the world. But it has the real ability to give people not back what they lost, but give certain elements of experiences back through technology, which I'm sure that passion with you in engineering. And
absolutely. I mean, there's a massive push in the UK now at the moment for innovative healthcare solutions, healthy aging. We've worked on projects with kids in Bath University that would alleviate. Obviously, I think our generation, or my generation, is going to be the first that will have serious arthritic problems in their hands and wrists from gaming. And I've never even thought of it like that. But then you look at some of the data, and it's like, well, how do we develop devices that you can continue to game, but you don't need to use a controller in that way? And so kids are developing these amazing ideas in universities, and for me, that kind of unrestricted blue sky thinking is just addictive. These kids come up with the best ideas. So we're running a competition in schools in the UK at the end of this year, and it's around designing assistive technology. But you have to work with somebody who has a disability. You need to work with them because they will know what they want from a product or device or something that's not on the market yet. And so kids between 7 and 18 will work with end users, and then we develop the ideas, and then we feed the university ecosystem to push those ideas even further with more resources. And then ultimately, the overall winner will have their products prototyped and taken to market with seed funding, and just bringing more into that 80 space, more affordable, cool designs. Because a lot of disability is pretty ugly. Wheelchairs aren't beautiful, prosthetics aren't really, it's not that great. And ultimately, we all want to look and feel good. Mm-hmm. And I think, for designing better kit, cooler kit, more functional kit, is something that the kids are going to be better at than me, quite frankly.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago the phrase ultimate winner, and it just stuck with me. And I just feel like although all the adversity you've been through, are the ultimate winner, just due to the fact of everything that you have, the 95% of the things that you have now, the support and the love from your family, the self-confidence, the motivation, the drive, the purpose, the impact you're making in the world. And that's why I love doing these podcasts, because you said yourself that it's kind of almost like therapy for you for talking about it. So it's beneficial to you. It's also beneficial to me. It inspires me. Like, I'm now not only inspired, but also, you know, we've made a connection, and, you know, I'd love to support you in any way. And, you know, I don't know if you've read much about my backstory yet, but, you know, got a bit of a story to tell as well. So if there's anything I can do, I'm there for you, Alex. I would love to support you.
Very kind.
And it's been a pleasure having you on Turning Adversity into an Asset today. If people want to find you and they want to get involved with everything you're up to, what's the best place people can contact you on or see what you're all about?
Social media, really. We're in a process of kind of restructuring what we've done before. But yeah, so I took a 6-month break of social media, which I loved. I absolutely adored that 6 months, but I'm well and truly back on it now. So any kind of Instagram or Facebook, or head to the website and then send me an email on fundraising.
Website?
The Alex Lewis Trust. So www.alex-lewis.co.uk. And then there's get in contact that way. But I just feel that, you know, for me, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard about your backstory, read about it. You know, we've all got a story. And I think that's what's great about it. And if anyone's turned it into an asset, it's you. So the pleasure's all mine. Thank you for inviting me on the show. And we're just getting started on the adventure stuff. I'll give you a shout. There's more weird stuff to come.
Looking forward to it. Let's both together continue to turn those adversities into more assets. You know, we're young men. I know I've got silver in my hair, but that's because I've dyed it. I'm not quite as old as I might be. But we've got many years ahead to make many more impacts. And also, as I said, the ripple effect, you know, these people that we're inspiring, they're going to be the ones that continue this legacy on past our time. So, Alex, it's been a pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day over in London. You are in London, right? I'm
a bit further south.
Oh, right. Sorry. So I mean, when I say London, I mean England. It's just I've been out of the country for so long. London is just what I say. I mean England.
Where are you now?
I'm actually in Spain, but I've been living in Bali for 4 years. So I'm a bit of a digital nomad. But I will be. I'll tell you what. I'll come back to the UK for June because I'm actually launching a book and things like that around that sort of time. So
yeah, I saw that. Yeah. Jump on the boat and then I can interview you. You can tell your story.
Yeah, let's do that. Sounds perfect. Well, look, enjoy the rest of your day in the south of England, and and your Jack Russell that jumps up the back of the.
Honestly, she's an absolute psychopath. That dog.
Enjoy the rest of your day, Alex. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're an inspiration, but you know that already. Take care of joining us on Turning Your Adversity into an Asset.
Pleasure's all mine. Thanks so much.